Hello and welcome to this special on Indonesia, The Next Step. I'm Martin Sung.
And I'm Stuart Pallister. Over the next half an hour, we'll be taking an inside look at the challenges facing the country as President Abdurrahman Wahid fights for survival.
Well, Wahid, whose nickname is Gus Dur, is set on a collision course with the country's parliament. On Monday, it is due to begin debating a second censure motion, which could lead to a possible end to the Wahid presidency.
Gus Dur has little support left within Parliament and is widely expected to be forced to step down soon. However, that's still far from a foregone conclusion. A president who espouses non-violence now has his back to the wall, and he's making it clear he's not going without a fight. He's been talking about 400,000 of his supporters turning up in Jakarta from around the provinces for the parliamentary session.
It's a nationwide rebellion against the ways the parliament doing its work now.
Some, though, are convinced that Gus Dur is playing a game of brinkmanship as he tries to outmaneuver Parliament.
There's a fair bit of bluff in what he's saying, and in the final analysis he will pull back. And I think there's that you get that sense in the elite that they're aware of the dangers of the situation, and of course people can miscalculate.
The president's not had an easy time in office. He's having to grapple with the legacy of 3 decades of a corrupt dictatorship. The problems are huge.
The political elite has turned inward on itself, that communal and ethnic conflicts are occurring with disturbing frequency, that some leading economic indicators are headed in the wrong direction, investors are staying away in droves, and a shortage of leadership and management skills seems endemic at all levels of government. That's quite a list.
And on top of that, he's been losing what little support he had.
Well, remember, he comes from a minority party, number one. He got to deal with opposition parties before he came to office, and he broke his promises with those parties, and so in essence he is now cornered and isolated from the majority of the parliament.
The president's not only isolated, he's on a collision course with Parliament. It's unclear whether he'll face impeachment at this stage, but many believe the second memorandum will go through.
Since the first memorandum, February 1st, there's not much progress having done by White administration yet. Even his supporters getting reckless with call for holy war or jihad. It's certainly discouraged for a member of parliament for kind of like support Wahid further.
So the stage is set for a showdown. In the coming months, Wahid may be impeached or at least have to make another accountability speech. That is likely to be rejected. So many commentators believe his vice president will soon take over. But that depends on whether Megawati Sukarno Putri has enough nerve to seize the moment. After all, she's been reluctant to make a move up to now. Gus Dur loyalists are confident that the president will be able to reach a compromise with Megawati. The trade-off would be this. In return for her continuing support over the next few years, she would get the backing of the president and his party come 2004. The ball is now very much in Megawati's court. Megawati is now weighing her options. She'd clearly like the president to step down and make way for her voluntarily, but that doesn't seem likely to happen. If she does decide to make her move, she'll want to stay within the bounds of the Constitution, but could negotiate some preconditions to give her breathing space. And while it's debatable whether she could fare any better than Wahid, don't write off Gus Dur just yet. No one rated his chances of becoming president in the first place.
While he was in Jakarta recently, Stewart spoke to Foreign Minister Alwi Shihab, a close friend of the president, and started by asking him if the Gus Dur presidency can survive and whether his administration is now a lame duck government.
I don't think that premise is quite true, because constitutionally the president cannot be unseated. And if you are talking about the alleged involvement of the president as an entry to unseat him, the whole world, the whole population, even those in the parliament, when you talk heart to heart, they would say that this is not an accurate justification to unseat the president, because the president is only alleged to get involvement or some role in the alleged scandal. You see, investment will not come to Indonesia because of this bickering. And who are those who are in the midst of this bickering? Legislative and executive. Let them reconcile. Let them be patient a bit. 3-4 years is not a long period of time. Let the government do its job, and by the end of the term, let him be responsible of what he has been doing.
But when the president speaks about 400,000 protesters coming to Jakarta and images of so-called suicide squads are shown around the world, that really doesn't help much, does it?
Exactly. If you see it from one perspective, people are talking about why those people are preparing themselves to come to Jakarta. This is a reaction. Why don't you remedy the action? Why those people come to this situation, to this condition? Because they see that the president has been ill-treated, has been treated unjust. So the unjust treatment of the president trigger the bitterness, the anger of those people who support the president. But at the same time, I think the president is a man of humanity. You know him, and everybody knows him. He doesn't want to see this happening. He kept calling the leaders of the organization not to let them come to Jakarta, because this will only jeopardize the nation, the destiny of Indonesia. We want those in the parliament use their conscience, be as objective as possible in order to reduce tension and eliminate bloodshed in the nation, which is not to the interest of all of us as citizens of Indonesia.
Indonesian Foreign Minister Alwi Shihab.
Well, after the break, we'll hear why Indonesia is being encouraged to take on the World Bank to get a major debt write-off. Stay with us. Welcome back to this special broadcast on Indonesia, the next step. Well, political uncertainty is doing little to help Indonesia's already crippled economy.
That's right, a plunging rupiah, high levels of unemployment and debt, you name it, it is broken. But it may just be all necessary pain. CNBC's Steve Engel has details.
Indonesia's economic and social problems have been going on for so long, there's little news in that these days. But what's telling so far this year is the rapid fall in the value of the rupiah, some 20% against the dollar. It's a sure sign of an absolute lack of confidence from foreigners. More than ever, Indonesia needs to tackle its core problems.
The answer to what is going to happen to to GDP growth is definitely a political and social issue, not a standard macroeconomic issue and business issue.
The priority for government is financing this year's budget and reducing raging public debt from its current level of more than 100% of GDP, and socially, those high levels of unemployment.
We create 1 million jobs last year, with almost 1/3 of the Singaporean population. But the fact is we still have 32 million people unemployed. We need the support of the bank and our international friend to have an effective anti-poverty and job creation program.
And getting the money back into the country would generally help the economy. The president understands that he needs to set the stage for foreign investors to return.
My problem now is how to expand the infrastructure as quickly as possible. This is important because without that kind of improvement in the infrastructure, then we cannot hope to have a healthy economic development.
Because it's a country not without opportunity, as the pace of development has slowed, and not to mention, it's a country of more than 200 million people, the fourth largest in the world in terms of population.
The opportunities will be there. This is still a very large, dynamic economy Any country of this size, it's going to be a strong economy eventually, in all likelihood.
Even so, plenty of pain still being felt in Indonesia, and the consensus appears to be that much of that pain stems from its recent moves towards democracy.
For 32 years, not a single rupiah of the proposed budget by the government refused by the parliament. No, we have to convince a very democratic public, a very demanding parliament, and a very open press. I want our international partner, including the IMF, to understand that we are now operate in a different ballgame.
But still, some say it's not impossible to achieve growth in that kind of environment.
Look at Italy. Italy has had a new government on average once a year, every year in the post-World War II period. Nonetheless, their real GDP growth has been quite good. Okay? So we know that ineffective government and, in fact, non-compliance on taxes, because Italy is infamous for low levels of tax compliance, doesn't prevent strong economic performance and a happy population.
A year and a half into a new democratic era, and Indonesia's track record has not been good, and it's not likely to get any better anytime soon. But the least the government can do is stop it from getting any worse. Stephen Engel, CNBC.
Well, as we've been hearing, one of the priorities of the Wahid government, at least on the economic front, is to rein in the budget deficit. Among the problems Jakarta is facing is its high level of debt.
Well, one prominent academic believes Indonesia should begin pressing the World Bank and other lending agencies to write off billions of dollars of what he calls criminal debt. The Suharto era did bring progress in terms of development to Indonesia, but it brought with it corruption on a massive scale. The Suharto family alone is alleged to have siphoned off tens of billions of dollars, much of that money earmarked for development projects. Now there's been a call for the World Bank and other lenders to write off billions of dollars of debt owed from the Suharto era.
For nearly half a century, the World Bank has participated passively in the corruption of roughly $100 billion of its loan funds intended for development around the world. I consider this actually a conservative estimate. 10 billion was stolen in Indonesia alone during the Suharto dictatorship.
Winters argues it was criminal for the World Bank and others to allow the money to be stolen, and adds it's criminal to expect the Indonesian people to repay money they never saw.
Indonesians, over the course of 30 years of lending from the World Bank, and that's about $30 billion, they received maybe 70 cents on the dollar. The rest went to cronies and others and people who stole within the system. Now the question becomes, will the World Bank step up to the plate and take financial responsibility? Willingly, I doubt it. But there are other options, including taking the World Bank to the International Court of Justice in The Hague.
Such a move would be without precedent, and Winters concedes the government would be reluctant to take on the World Bank like this.
The World Bank is very clear. The responsibility for the loans lies with the governments that borrow. If there is corruption in World Bank projects and it can be proven, we would insist on immediate repayment of those funds.
Hubert Nice, who's currently with Deutsche Bank, was a senior official at the IMF towards the end of Suharto's time in power, overseeing Indonesia. He says there are limits on what multilateral institutions like the IMF and the World Bank can do.
Most critics of the IMF and the World Bank criticize the institutions for getting involved too much in the country's affairs, being too intrusive, trying to take over management. And therefore, there are limits what outsiders can do to combat corruption.
So you're saying the IMF did all it could in the circumstances?
Well, that I don't say. Maybe more could have been done, yes.
Well, Winters, by the way, also believes it's not just the World Bank. The IMF, he says, also contributed to the country's banking crisis when it failed to make sure that proper safeguards were put in place at the time of the banking sector's liberalization in the 1980s.
Hubert Nice does concede that liberalization of the banking system in the 80s made the sector more vulnerable. But he rejects accusations that the IMF was responsible for the crisis. He blames that on reckless lending by banks.
Up next, graft, and more graft.
We'll look at what can be done to reform Indonesia's ineffective judiciary. Stay tuned. Welcome back. At the heart of Indonesia's woes is corruption. The source of President Wahid's troubles, after all, are accusations by Parliament he may be involved in two graft scandals.
Well, corruption is endemic in Indonesia, and a growing number of Indonesians want that to change. But can the reformers dismantle the patronage system so deeply ingrained? CNBC's Jakarta correspondent Dini Jalal has this report.
Hello. When Adi Handoyo found out that a dozen judges were recently fired by a new justice minister promising reform in the judiciary, the former Supreme Court justice was skeptical. Indonesia's judges are so prone to corruption, says Handoyo, that the only deterrence to graft is a prison term.
They are not ashamed to take bribes. It's better to send them to jail. That's the only way to make a reform in the judiciary.
Unfortunately, reformers like Handoyo are not being heard. Handoyo tried to prosecute a few Supreme Court judges for suspected corruption recently. In response, the court declared the investigation team he led as illegal. That was a setback for Indonesia's stumbling legal reform campaign, because this final arbiter of justice sets the standard for lower courts. As a result, few prominent politicians or businessmen have been sentenced for graft. The case of the most famous suspect of all, former President Suharto, was thrown out. Many hope that a new Chief Justice will clean up his court and set a new standard.
If the new Chief Justice is willing and have the political will to remove the justices by, let's say, offering an early pension, that can be done to clean up the institution as the last bastion of justice.
Winarta also says salaries must be raised. A high-ranking judge earns only $400 a month, and prosecutors earn half that.
10 years from now, it is going to be catastrophic for the legal system of Indonesia, because all those brilliant lawyers are joining the law firm instead of the judiciary.
Winarta is at the vanguard of reform. He's part of a government-appointed team currently drafting a law for an anti-corruption commission to be established this August. The commission will have the powers to investigate and to prosecute. It can also tap phone conversations and search through all banking documents. But like the Chief Justice's appointment, the commission must be approved by Parliament, and that's where the problems begin. The bickering over the choice for Chief Justice is now in its 6th month, and the drafters expect as much opposition to the anti-corruption bill, especially from Suharto-era legislators fearing their own prosecution. Yet the hopeful continue to work for change. Prominent lawyer Mulya Lubis recently set up Judicial Watch, one of many graft-busting agencies now sprouting up all over Indonesia.
People have the right to know what kind of judges we have. That's a public education campaign.
No one ever said that cleaning up the courts will be easy. Pessimists say it may take a generation to unlearn 3 decades of systematic graft. But even those disheartened by the slow pace of reform are confident that change will take place. It has to, they say. Indonesia's political and economic future depends on it. Dini Jalal, CNBC, Jakarta.
But while Jakarta has been trying to hold the nation together with several provinces seeking to break away, one of the few successes of the Wahid government has been the spirit of reconciliation.
And that spirit was very much in evidence recently as two enemies trying to become old friends. After years of bitter conflict in East Timor, with the Indonesian forces trying unsuccessfully to crush resistance there, the former Portuguese colony gained independence in 1999 from Jakarta. Now the two sides are learning how to live in harmony. And that was symbolized quite clearly in a staged meeting between two men who used to be sworn enemies, retired Lieutenant General Prabowo Subianto and East Timorese resistance leader Xanana Gusmao. Gusmao had lived for years in the mountains of East Timor, a guerrilla fighter on the run from the Indonesian forces, before finally being captured and jailed.
War is a monster that devours human lives. Violence and war never produced winners or losers. They only produce hostility, hatred, revenge, and uncontrolled passions.
Prabowo Subianto was the commander of the feared elite Indonesian Kopassus troops. They'd been a law unto themselves as they roamed around East Timor.
Usually I do not attend these gatherings, but I think this is a great honor for me because I saw in the invitation that I would be meeting Mr. Sanana Gusmao, who the last time I met him was when he was in prison in Cipinang, and I visited him. At that time I was still in active service, and now the wheels of fortune have turned, and so now I have to address him as Your Excellency, but that is life, c'est la vie.
For Gusmao, the time had come to put the past behind him and look to the future.
What for hatred or revenge? It will not solve anything.
So now, despite all the bloodshed, the old enemies are trying to become friends.
In a sense, it's it's quite in a sense a moving thing that two people who were enemies were able to hug each other and speak at least in a friendly way to each other. How deeply they feel it, I have no idea. But I think it says something about the change in Indonesia. And I think it also goes back to Gus Dur.
So, a chance to move on. And now Indonesia and East Timor are looking to make amends for more than 2 decades of enmity and hostility. And so some progress is being made in Indonesia, even though the government continues to muddle through.
But of course, though, there's still a long way to go, and the next few months will be crucial for the Wahid administration. That's it for the CNBC special. Thanks for watching.